Hello, good people. Konnichiwa, good people. Today, I wanted to talk about Nihongo, otherwise known as Japanese, and how I've maintained my Nihongo throughout the years since I've learned it. So, we're gonna go back in time once again to, well, while I was looking for books. We'll go back to when I was like 12 for a second. I was about 12 and I went into a Barnes & Noble. Remember those? Remember bookstores? Go support your local bookstores. That's the plug. So I remember going into the store and I saw this book, my first 1,000 words in Japanese. And for some reason I picked it up. Apparently it had an internet linked pronunciation guide. I wonder what that was. I think I liked it because of the illustrations, but yeah, I picked it up and I memorized the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Gotta be able to do that still. But that was about it. I think the rest of it I kind of just let it happen, right? So these are the numbers pages. So that must have meant that this was going to be a reason why I was going to end up studying Japanese, living in Japan, learning Japanese, all those different things. So my freshman year of college, I went to the University of Redlands, specifically the Johnston Center for Integrative Studies, which is a small private university in Southern California, about an hour east of LA. And it was hard enough for me to move to LA. I had never lived away from my parents for that long, my family. I was really like scared and sad, and it took me a long time to get comfortable there. And so about October of my freshman year, we had this thing called May Term, which was a month-long program where you could study or you could go travel. And I went to the travel introduction event where the professors talked about what they were going to offer for May Term. And I get there, and there's this teacher there, Kawahara Sensei, and sensei means teacher, for those of you that don't know. And so in this sense it means teacher, but it's sort of interchangeable with professor, although there's a different word for that. So Kawahara Sensei is talking about how she takes students to Japan for a month. They go to schools, they learn about Japanese life, and then they stay with a host family for that whole month, for 2 weeks out of that month. So 2 weeks are traveling and 2 weeks are at a host family. And something clicked in my brain. I had only studied Spanish up until I got into college, and I placed into the highest level that my university offered for Spanish. And so I guess I was interested in that. Originally, I thought I was going to go to Ecuador for the May term, and then I was going to go to Spain for study abroad, but something happened. I can't even put my finger on it. And as soon as the presentation was over, I ran up to Kawahara Sensei and I was like, I want to go on this trip. And she was like, okay, here's the information, like, go ahead and fill it out. I'm like, Called my parents. I'm like, I want to go to Japan. And they're like, you couldn't even make it to California. How are you going to make it to Japan? And I was like, I don't know. We'll figure it out. So I went so far west that I ended up going east. And at the end of my freshman year, I had the opportunity to go to Japan for a month. And it was wonderful. It was my first time out of the country. I had been to Mexico before for vacation, and I had done a homestay in Guanajuato. But it wasn't, this was my first time out of North America. So, and my first time with, I would say, Eastern culture. And so I was just mind blown. We went to Hiroshima, Kyoto, Nagasaki, and then we went up north to Tokyo, and we ended up staying in Chiba, which happens to be my favorite prefecture, in case I haven't made that clear, which is why I have the Chiba-kun right there. Chiba Prefecture was where my host families were. So I ended up having 2 host families. One kept me for 1 week and one kept me for the other, but they were friends. So it worked out really nicely, and now they're like family. My host sisters have all either graduated high school and are on to college, have graduated college, or getting ready to go to college. It is amazing how we've kept up these connections. But I go to Japan and I decide that I want to be able to speak with my host family. I'm like, okay, I'm coming back from Japan, going back to LA. I need to be able to speak with my host family. And so I go back to college, and of course we have a Japanese program, and I start taking it for my sophomore year, and I actually ended up changing a lot of my major because of this. So originally I was going to do art therapy. If you've seen in my other videos, I was going to do art therapy, but I decided that languages were my thing now, and so I was going to study Spanish and Japanese, and once I ran out of Spanish, I didn't know yet, but I was going to end up studying Chinese as well, and Korean, because I fell in love with K-pop, wanted to learn the Korean language, so started studying that on my own because my university didn't have those classes. So go back, start studying with Inoue Sensei, may he rest in peace. He was the teacher that really, Kawahara Sensei introduced me to Japanese culture, Inoue Sensei introduced me to Japanese culture and to the language, and he really set a great foundation for me learning Japanese. And I guess that's where I'll get into how I've learned Japanese. So Inoue Sensei was my first teacher, and he emphasized learning the language and the culture at the same time. So it wasn't like you were just learning like konnichiwa, you were learning like when to use konnichiwa and things like that. And there were two language teachers that have had a really big impact on my life. The other was Mrs. Dragonetti, may she also rest in peace. She was my Spanish teacher in high school, and she taught me one of my favorite things to remember about languages, which is grammar is finite, vocabulary is infinite. And what she meant by that was the grammar, once you get it down, it's sort of not going to change. Grammar doesn't really change that much. It's the structure, it's the basis of the language, but vocabulary is always changing. And we've seen that with English, we've seen that with Spanish, we've seen it with all the different languages around the world. So if you can keep up with the vocabulary, you're always going to be able to sort of speak that language. And so those two tools in my pocket were the ways in which I've been able to learn languages with great fluency and be able to really understand and love the language in a different way. So really loved Inoue Sensei's classes. He taught us, normally when you take a class, you learn hiragana. There are 3 alphabets in Japanese, so you learn hiragana, katakana, and then kanji. So in the first year, we only learned hiragana and a little bit of katakana. And then I was so into Japanese at this point that I decided I was going to take it in the summers as well. So I went to UCLA and in the summers was taking Japanese classes, and I ended up meeting a lot of great friends who some of them are now Japanese teachers themselves. But we used a lot of textbooks that I think were really helpful for me learning Japanese. So one of them, of course, you've probably seen if you study Japanese or if you're interested in Japanese, Genki. This one's really great. It has a lot of the instructions and words and things like that, but you can tell a lot of it is in hiragana. There's not too much kanji in here. And then there's another Genki, where you learn a little bit more kanji and stuff like that. These are just some of my textbooks that I've kept. I either gave them away or gave them to people who were studying Japanese, but that was a really great introduction. And then I went back to my university and studied for 3rd year. I was supposed to go abroad, but then the Great East Japan earthquake happened. And so I wasn't able to, so I ended up taking classes at UCLA. I took class at my university for about a semester, and then I ended up taking classes at UCLA again. And that time we used Aozora, which is another great textbook. But again, this one has much more kanji. It was an intensive intermediate to advanced level class. So learned a lot in a lot of weeks. And that was a really great textbook. So Aozora is a really great one to learn. Of course, the Genki group also has different books that you can use to learn kanji and things like that. So I used this book as a workbook. It's really great to keep up with writing kanji and being able to know it. And this one, Kanji Look and Learn, which is another one. It just has really great images and shows you where the characters came from and all those different things. So these were all very instrumental in me learning Japanese from the basis. Of course, a Japanese dictionary is always good. I had this one as well as an electronic one that's broken. It's somewhere over there, but it's broken now. But the electronic one was great before they came out with apps. And I'll put a link below for an app that I bought a couple years ago that's been really great. It's called Midori, and it is super helpful. These are all my language apps, and it is really great. My phone's in Japanese. That's another way that I keep up my Japanese now. But you can search by general, name, or examples. Reibun, Ippan, Namae. So those are the three that you can search by. And it's got pretty much everything that a digital dictionary would have, and it's always being updated. It is $10, but I'll still put a link below. I think it's a good investment if you're interested in keeping up with Japanese and you really want to keep learning it. So then, after college, after graduating, I moved to Japan, and I was teaching English there on the JET program, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, and I decided I wanted to go for the Noryoku Shiken. So the Noryoku Shiken, the proficiency exam, is an exam that you can take to determine your fluency in Japanese. So there are 5 levels. 5 is the lowest, and then 1 is the hardest. I have N2, so I have the second to the top. I've tried for N1 twice, and I'll show you the books that I've used for it. N1 it escapes me every time, so I got to keep trying on that one. And most people will tell you that N1 is good if you want to be like a translator, interpreter, things like that, but it's not necessarily like the end-all be-all. N2 is still really great, and you can still get a lot of jobs with N2 proficiency. So N1 is great, it's nice to have, it's a good goal, keeps me studying, but I'm okay that I don't have it just yet. So the books that I've used to study for the Noryoku Shiken, the proficiency exam, have been Nihongo so Matome, which is this series, and they all have different animals that are associated with them. So this one is a chipmunk, but this is for the N1 level. This book is all in Japanese. There's barely any English. There's some for like some of the vocabulary, but otherwise all of the sentences are in Japanese. All the examples are in Japanese, and then there's like a quiz at each end of the section. So I really love this series. I have, this one is the vocabulary. This one is reading, dokkai. I have all 5 of the books. Let's see. This one is grammar, bunpo. This one is kanji. Of course, you have to know kanji. I know a lot of people hate kanji, but I think I like it because it reminds me of like art, and once you like think about what the meaning of the character is, it's easier to remember it. And then listening. And this one comes with a CD. And then there's also a practice exam booklet that you can take. It has 2 exams that you can try out, which is really helpful. Another series that another friend of mine recommended that I actually really love too is the Kanzen Master. This one has absolutely no English in it. All the instructions are in Japanese. There's not even like examples or like vocabulary explained. Everything's explained in Japanese. So it's a really great way to really immerse yourself in Japanese when you're studying for the test. So this is a really great series. And again, I'll put all the links below for all of the books. And then in Japan, I ended up taking N3 and N2 back to back, and I passed both of them. It was really great. I don't love standardized tests like SAT and stuff like that, but for some reason I really like the Noryoku Shiken tests, the proficiency exam tests, so I enjoyed that. This is another great book. This is also by the Soul Matome group. It's 500 questions that you can just do, and you can take it with you anywhere. So that's a really good practice booklet as well. So lots of different resources out there for you. So some of the ways that I've kept up my Japanese, when I came back from Japan, I worked at the Japanese consulate here in Chicago, and we had to use Japanese in our day-to-day work. I did a lot of translation work, as well as some interpretation and some events and things like that. So that was a way for me to keep it up. But then I moved on from the consulate to where I'm at now, which is Chicago's sister cities. And I do manage our Osaka, Japan sister city relationship, but I don't use my Japanese as much as I did at the consulate. So I keep, some ways that I keep it up are, I keep my phone in Japanese. That just helps me see it more, read the characters more. You have to remember the instructions or like figure out what the instructions are trying to tell you if it's something new. And then I also do a lot of reading in Japanese, so reading books. This one is really easy if you're just starting out, like getting ready to like dive into reading Japanese books. I actually really recommend this one. The kanji is not too crazy. It's a pretty easy storyline. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of a crazy storyline. I won't really tell you what it's about, but there's also a movie about it. So if you watch it, you could watch the movie and then read the book, or you could read the book and then watch the movie, and that'll just sort of confirm that you're understanding what it's about. But I really like this one. Anything Haruki Murakami is really great in Japanese or English, of course, but in Japanese, his writing style just makes it a little bit easier to digest. So I have a lot of his books behind me in English and Japanese, and there's something that changes for me when I read a book in Japanese or I watch a movie in Japanese. So, for example, I love the Hayao Miyazaki films, and I like Totoro and Spirited Away and all of those different films. I grew up watching them, and then I learned Japanese, and I was like, let me watch these movies in Japanese. And the feeling was just like, 本当に感動しました。いや、感動で、it was just like, really, I really felt like something different, like hearing it in Japanese and understanding it in Japanese. So I encourage you, if you're studying it, don't give up, like keep going. It's a really great language. I know a lot of people talk about languages that opened up doors for them. Japanese was that for me. It opened up doors to Chinese and Korean. My Chinese, I aced all of my Chinese classes because I do all of the kanji in Chinese at the first level. Now, if I'd kept taking it, I probably would have had to learn different characters because they only use characters. But yeah, it really helped with that. And of course, Korean, it's helped me with my grammar, as well as I keep a list of, when I'm watching Korean dramas or Korean TV shows, I will keep a list of the words that sound the same in my phone. I'll write them in Japanese and then in Korean. And it's just nice to reference those every once in a while. Some other books to keep around. This is Gyongo, which is like the onomatopoeias. So things like bata bata or waku waku, different words that are interesting to use to like describe a feeling. Let's see if I can find a fun one. This one's good. Uki uki. So uki uki describes someone who is happy and excited in a buoyant mood. And the verb is uku. And then you have uki uki. Ureshikute kokoro ga hazamu kashi. And it's like things like it's explaining to you about the different ways in which you can use uki uki. So in the picture, the woman is getting ready to go on a trip. And it's just like, yeah, like your heart is so excited. You're so happy. Ureshikute. So that's what this book is. That is how I keep up my Japanese. I use books. I listen to music. I watch TV shows. A really good channel if you're into YouTube. Of course, you're here. You're watching this video. No Good TV by Akane Shijin and Nishiki Doryo. They have a lot of videos up now. That's great for practicing listening. And they're pretty funny, so it's a really great experience. Of course, talking to people. I still keep up with my host families. I still use Line, the messenger service. I'm still writing things and practicing learning the kanji and things like that. So got to keep up Japanese. If you don't use your languages, they will leave you very quickly. So yeah, it's a really great tool that I've gained. I love learning languages. I hope to continue to learn languages and really be able to connect with more people around the world. I would say that Japanese really opened up my world in a way that I never thought was possible. I was able to connect with so many people. Actually, there's one story I will leave you with. While I was living in Japan, I started studying naginata, which is what that thing is in the corner there. It's a form of martial arts that usually women did. The women of samurais would stay home and they had to have a longer sphere in case somebody tried to attack the home. So that's what that is. It doesn't have a sphere on it anymore. It doesn't have the spear on it. But I learned that while I was in Japan. It's a whole nother story for when I talk about my time living in Japan. And I was on a team was practicing it. And so one day they were like, oh, we're gonna have a team dinner. And I was like, okay. And it ends up that we go to like middle of nowhere, beautiful home in the fields and things like that. And I'm just sitting there having like the time of my life with these Japanese people that like barely knew me. Like I had just started, but like they accepted me, and because I spoke Japanese, I was able to experience that and be there with them in that. And I'll never forget that time with them, and I'll never forget learning naginata and things like that. So Japanese is really, really close to my heart, and I really hope to continue to use it in my future as I move forward with everything that I'm doing. So hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about learning Japanese, of course, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to answer. I love talking about Japanese. I love encouraging people to learn Japanese. So, 頑張りましょうね.